Walk out into your garden this July morning and look closely at the plants you were so proud of back in May. Something has shifted. The color has gone a little flat. A few leaves have crisped at the edges. A bud that should have opened hasn't. And here and there a plant that used to stand tall now sags by afternoon. You haven't changed a thing about how you care for it. So what happened? Here's the truth almost nobody tells you. The biggest threat to your garden in July isn't a pest or a disease. It's that you're still caring for your plants the way you did in spring, and July simply doesn't play by spring's rules. My name is John Sam, and here at Seniors Gardening Advice, we spend our summers solving exactly this kind of quiet garden mystery. Today we're walking through 12 of the most beloved plants in the American garden, the mistake that quietly ruins each one in July, and the small fix that turns it around. Settle in, because your garden is about to make a lot more sense. Plant 1. Hostas. The single biggest hosta mistake is watering a little every evening instead of watering deeply once or twice a week. A nightly splash feels responsible, but it trains roots to stay shallow and lazy, camped right at the surface where the sun bakes them first. An established hosta in decent garden soil wants roughly an inch of water a week, delivered slowly so it sinks well below the surface, coaxing roots down into cooler, steadier soil that never fully dries out. Before you water at all, push a finger 3 or 4 inches into the ground beside the plant. Dry down there, water. Still cool and damp, walk away. That one habit ends nearly all the guesswork. Where you plant matters just as much as how you water. A hosta tucked under a mature tree is fighting thousands of thirsty tree roots for every drop, while one pressed against the house under a roof overhang often stays bone dry even after a downpour, since the roofline flings rain somewhere else entirely. Walk your own yard and treat each hosta according to its actual microclimate rather than a single blanket schedule. Always aim water at the soil, never the leaves. Foliage that stays wet overnight is an open invitation to fungal disease and to foliar nematodes, which travel through films of standing water and leave sharp, angular yellow streaks between the leaf veins. Morning watering gives any stray splashes a full day to dry before nightfall. If you grow one of the powder blue varieties, like Halcyon or Blue Angel, keep it in the shadiest spot you've got, since that dusty blue color comes from a delicate wax coating that harsh afternoon sun slowly melts away for good. And check after dark with a flashlight for slugs, which do their damage overnight and vanish by morning, leaving ragged holes behind as the only clue. Plant 2. Hydrangeas. Hydrangeas share nearly every hosta habit: deep watering instead of daily sipping, feeding the soil rather than the leaves, and morning sun with real afternoon shelter, since those enormous leaves lose water faster than almost anything else in the garden. But they carry one heartbreak that trips up more gardeners than any other mistake combined, and it happens with a pair of pruners in hand. Everything comes down to a single question: does your hydrangea bloom on old wood or new wood? Bigleaf mopheads, lacecaps, oakleaf types, and mountain hydrangeas all set next year's flower buds on this year's stems in late summer, and those buds ride quietly through winter waiting to open. Prune those varieties in fall or spring, and you snip away an entire season of blooms without ever realizing it, leaving a plant that grows leafy and healthy and stubbornly bare. Panicle hydrangeas and the smooth types, including the beloved Annabelle, bloom on new wood instead, and forgive a hard cutback in late winter with strong stems and generous flowers the same year. If your hydrangea droops dramatically by mid-afternoon, don't panic and don't reach for the hose. Those huge leaves are simply shedding water faster than the roots can resupply it, and most plants perk right back up by evening. The real test is the next morning. Still wilted at sunrise means truly dry roots and a deep soak is due, but an afternoon flop over damp soil needs nothing at all. One more trick worth knowing. Bigleaf mopheads can shift color with soil chemistry, turning blue in acidic soil and pink in sweeter, more alkaline ground, though it takes a season or two of patient adjustment to see the change. Plant 3. Roses. Roses punish humidity more than they punish heat, And the July mistake that undoes an entire season is letting fallen, spotted leaves sit on the ground beneath the bush. That debris is exactly where black spot fungus survives and reinfects the plant from below. And wet foliage from evening watering or overhead sprinklers only speeds the spread through the whole planting. Clear fallen leaves regularly, water the soil rather than the canopy, and do it in the morning so any splashes dry out well before evening humidity sets in. A 3 to 4 inch layer of mulch around the base holds soil moisture steady and blocks fungal spores from splashing up onto lower leaves during a hard rain. If black spot has already taken hold, an antifungal spray reapplied roughly every 7 days through the humid stretch of summer keeps it from spreading further, though good housekeeping prevents far more infection than any spray ever cures. Watch too for Japanese beetles, which feed in groups, skeletonize leaves down to the veins, and release their own scent trail that calls in more beetles the longer they're left alone. Handpicking them into a bucket of soapy water each morning, before the day heats up and they scatter, is still one of the most effective controls available. And keep deadheading spent blooms right through summer, cutting just above a strong outward-facing leaf, to coax the bush into pushing out another flush of flowers instead of putting its energy into seed production. Plant 4 tomatoes. Blossom end rot, that sunken, leathery black patch that shows up on the bottom of an otherwise perfect tomato, gets blamed on calcium deficiency every single year. And almost every year the real cause is inconsistent watering rather than a lack of calcium in the soil. Calcium can only travel through a steady stream of water moving up through the plant. So a garden that swings between bone dry and soaking wet can't move enough of it into the developing fruit, even when there's plenty sitting in the ground. The fix is even moisture, not more fertilizer. A deep soak 2 or 3 times a week beats a quick daily sprinkle every time, and a thick layer of mulch around the base buffers the soil against the wild swings in temperature and moisture that a hot July afternoon can bring. Ease off high nitrogen feeding as fruit starts forming, since it pushes lush green leaves at the expense of the tomatoes you're actually growing for. Watch also for fruit cracking around the shoulders, which comes from that same moisture inconsistency, usually a sudden heavy rain or deep watering after a long dry spell that swells the fruit faster than the skin can stretch. Consistent watering solves both problems at once. Prune out the lower leaves that touch the soil to improve airflow and cut down on early blight splashing up from the ground, and keep tomatoes well staked or caged so the fruit hangs clear of damp soil and the pests that live in it. Plant 5 boxwood. Boxwood decline in July is rarely one dramatic problem. It's a pileup of smaller stresses: drought, heavy clay mulch stacked too high against the stems, and heat-loving spider mites that together turn healthy green foliage bronze, dull, and thin. Boxwood mites thrive in exactly the hot, dry stretch most gardens hit in midsummer, and their feeding leaves a fine yellow stippling or a dusty, tired cast across the leaves that's easy to mistake for simple heat stress. A firm blast from the garden hose every few days for about 2 weeks knocks mite populations down dramatically with no spray required at all, since they can't climb back up once they've been dislodged. For heavier infestations, a summer-weight horticultural oil or insecticidal soap handles what the hose alone can't. Keep mulch pulled back a few inches from the stems so the base can breathe. Water deeply during dry spells rather than lightly and often, and avoid shearing boxwood in the hottest part of the day, since fresh cuts scorch fast in direct sun. Also keep an eye out for boxwood leaf minnow, whose larvae tunnel inside the leaves and cause blistered, discolored patches, and boxwood psyllid, which cups and curls the newest leaves at the tips. Both are mostly cosmetic and are best managed simply by pruning out the affected growth as soon as you spot it, rather than reaching straight for a chemical treatment. Plant 6 Japanese maples. The crispy, curled brown edges that show up on Japanese maples in July look alarming, but they're almost always leaf scorch rather than disease. The tree is simply losing water through its leaves faster than its roots can replace it, a problem made far worse by hot, drying wind, reflected heat off pavement, and any stretch of days with inconsistent watering. Water deeply at the root zone with a soaker hose rather than an overhead sprinkler, since wetting the leaves themselves in bright sun can actually intensify the scorch instead of relieving it. Never fertilize a stressed tree in the middle of summer. It doesn't ease the tree's burden, it adds to it, and high nitrogen fertilizer applied to moist soil and hot weather can even cause a kind of salt burn that mimics scorch on its own. If your maple sits in full sun, mulch generously to keep the root zone cool, and during any prolonged heat wave, watering during or right after a hot, dry wind helps minimize further leaf damage. Scorched leaves themselves won't green back up this season, no matter what you feed or spray. But the good news is that the tree almost always recovers fully and pushes a completely fresh, healthy set of leaves the following spring. Laceleaf and variegated varieties tend to be the most sensitive to both scorch and cold, so give those cultivars the gentlest spot you have, ideally morning sun followed by afternoon shade. Plant 7 Peonies. Peonies rarely struggle from heat itself. The July mistake is almost always planting or mulching them too deep, and it's also the single most common reason a healthy-looking peony refuses to flower at all. The pink growth buds on the crown, called eyes, need to sit no more than an inch or two below the soil surface, and piling mulch directly on top of the crown buries them just as effectively as planting the whole clump too deep in the first place. If your peony's foliage looks tired, blotchy, or has fuzzy gray patches on the buds and stems, that's usually botrytis blight, a fungal disease encouraged by wet leaves, crowded stems, and poor air movement through the clump. Cut back and destroy any affected foliage at the end of the season rather than tossing it on the compost pile, where the fungus can easily survive the winter and reinfect next year's growth. Give plants enough breathing room between them so air moves freely, and avoid overhead watering that leaves foliage wet overnight. Don't worry about the ants that seem to swarm peony buds every spring. They're simply feeding on the sugary nectar the buds produce and cause no harm to the plant whatsoever. Peonies are also famously long-lived and resent being disturbed, so unless a clump has grown seriously overcrowded, leave the roots alone. If division ever becomes necessary, early fall is the right time, done well after the summer heat has broken. Plant 8 Clematis. Clematis wants cool, shaded roots and a warm, sunny face, and the classic July mistake is leaving that root zone exposed to bake all day in the sun, which stresses the vine badly and opens the door to clematis wilt, a fast-moving fungal disease that can collapse an entire stem seemingly overnight. Keep 2 to 3 inches of mulch, or a low companion plant, shading the base of the vine while the top growth climbs up into full sun above. Large-flowered hybrids are far more susceptible to wilt than small-flowered species types, so if you're growing one of the big, dramatic bloomers, protecting the root zone matters even more. Symptoms start as dark, water-soaked spots on the leaves and stems before the affected growth suddenly wilts and turns black within days. If a stem does collapse, cut it back to healthy tissue right away and keep watering as normal. The roots usually survive even when the top growth doesn't, especially if the vine was planted with a couple of buds below soil level to begin with, and fresh shoots typically return the following season. Avoid heavy, high-nitrogen feeding in the heat of summer, since it encourages soft, leafy growth at the expense of flowers, and adds even more stress to a vine that's already working hard just to stay hydrated. Thin out crowded growth periodically to improve airflow, since good ventilation does more to prevent wilt and leaf spot than any fungicide applied after the fact. Plant 9 Lavender. More lavender plants are lost to kindness than to neglect, and the July mistake is watering it like a thirsty perennial instead of the drought-tough Mediterranean shrub it actually is. Lavender roots sitting in consistently damp soil, especially heavy clay that holds water, quickly develop root rot, which shows up as gray, wilting foliage and a general decline, even though the ground looks perfectly moist to the touch. Let the soil dry out well between waterings and skip rich fertilizer entirely. Lavender that's fed heavily grows soft and leggy, with far less of the fragrance and flower production it's actually grown for. Make sure it's planted somewhere water drains away quickly rather than pooling around the crown. And if your yard has heavy clay, consider a raised bed, a mounded planting area, or a gravel-amended soil mix instead of fighting the native ground every season. English lavender tends to handle humid summers better than the French and Spanish types, which prefer drier climates almost entirely. In humid regions, growing lavender in a container is often the safer bet, since a pot lets excess water escape far faster than garden soil ever can. After the first flush of blooms fades, a light shearing back by about a third encourages a tidier shape, and often a smaller second bloom later in the season. But avoid cutting back hard into old woody growth, which lavender is notoriously slow to recover from. Plant 10 ferns. Ferns look delicate, but the July mistake is usually too much direct afternoon sun rather than too little water. Excess light scorches fronds into a papery, faded brown, especially on thinner, lacier varieties, while deep shade with dappled morning light keeps most garden ferns lush and green ripe. Through the hottest stretch of summer, if you're seeing browning from the outer fronds inward, check the light exposure first before assuming disease or pests are to blame. Ferns also want consistently moist, never soggy, soil, so a thick layer of mulch that slows evaporation matters here more than almost any feeding schedule. Most ferns growing in decent, organic-rich garden soil barely need fertilizer at all, and a heavy dose of it can do more harm than good by pushing weak, floppy new growth in the heat. Container ferns dry out considerably faster than ferns in the ground, so check the soil daily during a hot spell and consider grouping pots together to share a slightly more humid microclimate. Browning fronds can also come from root competition with nearby trees, which pull moisture away from shallow fern roots just as aggressively as they do from hostas planted in the same bed. If a clump has grown crowded and less vigorous over the years, division in early spring, rather than the heat of summer, is the best way to renew it. Plant 11 azaleas. These acid-loving shrubs suffer most in July from lace bugs, tiny insects that pierce the undersides of leaves and leave the top surface stippled with pale yellow specks, combined with drought stress from their notoriously shallow root systems, which sit much closer to the surface than most gardeners realize. A layer of mulch 2 to 3 inches deep protects those shallow roots from drying out and keeps soil temperatures steadier through a heat wave, while deep, infrequent watering serves them far better than a light daily sprinkle. Check the undersides of leaves for the lace bugs themselves or for their dark, tar-like droppings, since damage is often visible from above long before the insects are easy to spot. Treat early with insecticidal soap or a targeted horticultural oil if you find them, because populations build quickly once hot, dry weather sets in, and a bad infestation can leave foliage looking permanently bleached and unhealthy for the rest of the season. Both azaleas and rhododendrons set next year's flower buds in late summer, so heavy pruning done too late in the season, or fertilizing too aggressively in July, can push soft new growth that both weakens the plant heading into fall and sacrifices next spring's flowers. If pruning is needed at all, do it immediately after the current bloom fades, well before the plant begins forming next year's buds. Plant 12 black-eyed Susans. These tough summer perennials seem practically indestructible, which is exactly why the July mistake is overwatering and overfeeding plants that actually prefer to be left a little hungry and a little dry. Too much water and overly rich soil produces floppy, overgrown stems that flop over in the first summer storm, along with a noticeably higher risk of powdery mildew developing on crowded, humid foliage. Water only during real dry spells rather than on a fixed schedule, and skip fertilizer altogether in average garden soil, since both plants evolved on lean prairie ground and simply don't need the boost. Thin, crowded clumps every few years so air moves freely between the stems, which does more to prevent mildew than any fungicide sprayed after the fact. Watch for aster yellows, a bacteria-like disease spread by leafhoppers that causes stunted, greenish, distorted blooms. There's no cure, so affected plants should be removed and destroyed rather than left to spread the infection through the bed. Deadhead spent blooms regularly through midsummer to keep both plants flowering strong right through to frost, but consider leaving the very last flush of seed heads standing into fall. Goldfinches and other songbirds rely heavily on those seed heads for food as the weather turns, and the dried seed heads themselves add real winter structure to a garden bed that would otherwise go bare. 12 plants, 12 small habits, and every one of them comes down to the same idea. Give a plant what July actually needs, not what worked for it back in May. Walk your garden this evening, check the soil with your finger before you reach for the hose, and watch where the afternoon sun really lands. Tell me in the comments which of these plants has been giving you trouble this summer, and I'll see you in the next one.